I'm a survivor. At the end of the day, like that's my story. Yeah, I went through it. Yeah, this is painful, but it's not gonna break me. This is me. Like I survived all of that for a reason.
Hey everyone, I'm the founder of Maribel Beauty. My name is Mariana, and I'm here today with Jennifer. Jennifer and I met about a week ago, and I feel like when we first started talking, we just instantly connected. Jennifer will be joining us today on the podcast, talking about her amazing story, her struggles overcoming her abuse. And thank you so much, Jennifer, for joining me today. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to sit with me and talk about your story.
Nah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
So, I would love to start asking you about what makes you you.
Well, I'm a mom, so that definitely makes me happy. I have a beautiful 6-year-old. I love adventures. Like I'm a big outdoors person. I love softball. Really big into music, video games. Reading is my passion. Um, Growing up, I was really, really big bookworm, like all the time. I used to play a game bookworm also, like on the computer. And I was really, really big on being outdoors with the boys because I grew up around cousins. We used to always race down the street barefoot, used to play tackle football in the yard, baseball together. Who I am is just really athletic, really sportsy. I'm outgoing, but I'm also kind of to myself in a way too, me and my daughter.
So,
Yeah.
when do you think that first started when you started to be more to yourself and a little bit closed off? Like, was there a certain incident in your childhood that kind of gravitated you towards that personality trait, or were you always kind of like that?
Surprisingly, I've always kind of been like that. Like I have always had like a really short social meter. Um, like even growing up, like I would be out and about and around, but when I was ready to go inside, I would go inside. A lot of people think it is because of my abuse. I grew up being sexually abused by family members, friends of the family, but honestly, I think it that one took more of a turn for me. Like most kids become isolated, they become withdrawn. And with me, it just made me more outgoing. Maybe not in the best way, but it made me more outgoing to get away from what was happening at home. I was more into making friends, more into doing sports, like anything to keep me from being in the environment that I was in. Um, if, one of my abusers were around, basically.
Right. So, do you think that when you were going through this abuse, was that kind of your way to cope? Was through sports and through your social life outside of your home, maybe at school?
When I first started getting abused is around 7, 8 years old. So like school was definitely a big one for me. Like I would take everything that I was dealing with at home and it just made me that kid at school that was like super kind, super nice to everyone. My abuse lasted for a very long time. And it was, different people, different situations, but the abuse lasted up until a couple years ago, actually. I'm 25 now. So that's giving you like a good 10 plus year time frame basically. But like those friendships led me to middle school. And then I will say in middle school, sports became like what I needed. But my friendships became more dangerous, I guess, in a way. Like it was more of I wanted to just fit in. I wanted to be that kid. But it was like I was craving so much attention that my coping became being the girl that would get drunk or bring alcohol to school, especially with having older abusers and older people that I was interacting with in the not, best way. I had all this access to it. But it was like my coping went from reading and writing and sports, and eventually it became drinking, drugs, just your normal story, I guess. Like it starts out in an innocent coping way, and then you start to hit those downfalls as a teenager. And that's kind of how I kept going through high school too, which it was a mixture of both. Like it was those negative coping habits mixed in with still my love for softball, soccer and basketball and track. Like it was both, basically.
As you found yourself getting older, it's good you still had those outlets and those avenues of things that did make you happy, like sports and hobbies.
having sports, being outdoors, being active, it also helped with my depression. Like, you keep your body moving, you burn off all of that pent up frustration and anger, just depending on what sport. And for the days that I couldn't play sports due to an injury or not being able to afford to, that's where reading came in and writing. Like you could get lost in a book in so many words. And it was like your own mini escape. When I used to write, because I love journaling. And so, you put pen to paper, and you put emotions and thoughts into words that go into this journal, into this book that you attempt to write. As long as you find some form of outlet that's semi-positive, I feel like it definitely helps more than just putting a band-aid on it by, drinking your problems away. Because yeah, that helps for that time being, but as soon as your high is gone or you're back to being sober, it hits you even more.
Right. It's just a form of temporary happiness, I
Yes.
guess. It's really amazing that you found different outlets for you. You said that you were abused at the age of 7 to 8. I was wondering, when did you first realize the first incident of abuse, or when was the first incident of abuse? Did you even realize it was abuse when it was happening?
No, at the time I didn't. I grew up with boys, like a lot of boys, not just like my close cousins, but I have a big family. So we had, as I mentioned, uncles, cousins, friends of the family. And as a kid, you never know because those are people that's supposed to protect you. So it's like, you think that it's a game, you think that it's some form of love because that's what I was told was that, we're going to play a game and then this is what we do, like I love you, like this is what we do, this is the game we're playing. For years that's what I thought it was just some big game. We used to play family all the time, or like my family members would tell me that they would never hurt me because they're my family, that they love me. But then hitting a certain age, fifth grade, sixth grade, when they start bringing out these awareness classes for you, start talking about predators and things, you start to really realize like I'm being abused, but you can't put a word to it because again, this is your family. And it took me up until I was about 14, 15 to really like accept that my family was abusing me, but it still was a really hard thing to cope with.
Right, because at first you're still learning about the concept of like, intimacy and everything that's all new to you, and then connecting the dots like, oh wait, this is kind of familiar,
Yeah.
and just coming to that realization, it's so much, especially for a 14-year-old to handle. Like you're only starting to get to know yourself and introducing these new concepts and what has happened to you as a child. That's so overwhelming for a person to handle.
And then as a 14-year-old who was also involved in like a relationship with a 24-year-old, because again, when you grow up and you think that it's okay, like this is what I've been exposed to my whole life. So as a 14-year-old who, was involved with a 24-year-old, two of them at that, who's my dad's best friends, you think it's normal. When again, someone who's supposed to protect you, who is like a father figure to you, who's a family member to you, when they start telling you, this is normal, this is love, this is how I love you, this is how I take care of you, it's normal. And then being 14 and realizing your family has abused you, but you're in a relationship, so this can't be abuse, right? Like you hear the stories about like the Romeo and Juliet law that used to happen where they say like, if it's 3 years apart, things like that. I guess growing up, like being in that situation, I was like, okay, this is a lot different because I'm in a relationship. But it wasn't until I was 18 when I realized I was being abused by them too. But again, all of this seemed normal.
That was just normal to you, especially like as a 14-year-old. That was your concept of a relationship. That was normal to you, as you said. And I think the word normal is so important because normal is so different for everyone. What's normal to me is different compared to what's normal for you. Like you said, it wasn't until you were 18 that you started to realize what was actually happening to you. It was the people closest to you that was betraying your trust. And I think society always thinks like, oh, it's the random man or woman walking down the street in like an alleyway. It's someone you don't know. but that's not the case at all. Especially in your case, you said you had a lot of uncles growing up and you were surrounded by a lot of people, huge families. So, how do you think your family members betraying your trust, how do you think that impacted you as an adult?
In so many ways. As much as I attempted to be close to my family, there was always that strain because once I started realizing what was going on, it was almost as if I was seeing them with all these labels and anger and hatred. So then I became the kid who would act out, who would still love their family. You know, I loved my parents, was still angry at them because I felt like they should have protected me when it was brought to light. You know, it's a lot of emotions and who I am now. All of that abuse, everything that I saw my family as made me want to give my daughter different, basically. So, like, from my abuse, I learned how to be more protective of her, to be more like have more boundaries when it comes to certain things. I'm very cautious around who I bring around her. With anyone, you know, I don't just let her spend a night anywhere. Like it takes time to build up trust for me. And then it always made me want when I was able to have my own family to be that family that's more open and trusting. That if something, God forbid, were to happen to, you know, my daughter or any of my future kids, that they could come to me. I would do anything to get to the bottom of it. It wouldn't be oh, because that's a family member, hush, hush, keep it quiet. No, like
Right.
we're bringing it to the light. I would do everything to be on your side. Like you are telling the truth, no matter what, like I have your back. And I guess growing up, seeing my family, again, they're not the same people that they were then. Like I have a lot more respect in certain areas for my parents, for certain people. But seeing who they were growing up and having all of that come to my realization made me so determined to give my family a whole new definition of it. It will never be like that.
Yeah. I think you touched on such an important topic regarding family because just because someone is your family member doesn't give them like a free pass for anything, doesn't mean they can talk to you however they want, treat you however they want. Just because they're your family member, like they're still human. Still human. It doesn't give you like a free pass to bully or whatever, treat you however they want. And I know the saying is like blood is thicker than water, but the full metaphor is blood of the covenant is thicker than water of the womb,
Mhm.
which is meaning like blood of your enemy is thicker than water of the womb, than thicker than your family.
I did not
So
know that at all.
yeah, that's the full saying. That's how the saying goes, but it's interesting how it changed. Blood is thicker than water. Like, no, that's not the full metaphor. Yeah.
My opinion on family is pretty messed up, I guess, is because I've always had a strained relationship in so many ways. Like, you know, the abuse led to me having to find family in other people. Um, at some point, the system got involved. So I actually was part of this, you know, the foster care system in a way. And I had to develop what family was, had to decide what family could be. It made me realize that family is what you make it. Like it's, you know, that's a family that you're born with, yeah. But it's the family that you develop, it's the family that you choose and you grow with. That's family. Those are just
Right.
relatives after a while. As far as my family went, some of them were so concerned about image. Because that's really what it is. It's just image. It's not wanting someone to see the dirt that you have in your family, the dirty secrets, the skeletons in the closet. And so they would do anything. They would push what they could aside to seem perfect to who I'm not sure, but to seem perfect. It kept going like that, not even just with my abusers, but when I kept getting into certain situations, you know, like a lot of people don't know I was expelled in high school. Like I haven't graduated. A lot of people don't know that. They think that it's X, Y, and Z. Like I have mental health issues. I've been hospitalized. A lot of people don't know that because my family, instead of being open about what I went through, depression and things like that, I went on vacation. Even when I got into domestic violence, like, you know, relationships, it was don't tell anyone that you went through this or don't tell anyone about this person doing it. You know, like you don't want people to know that. But as I got older, it made me realize like these secrets are they cause more damage than anything. Like this is what hurts us. This is what hurts a survivor, a victim who becomes a survivor. Like you carry all of that. You don't have a voice because if you've been surrounded by people who tell you, don't tell your story, be quiet about this, just get over it, push it to the side. You go through all your pain and your trauma without a voice. And then when you get into an adult who has a kid, then you're trying to heal while coping with that. Or even when you just have, when you're an adult, like you realize it with your relationships, you realize it when you have friendships, like you realize how much damage truly is done because of someone telling you you don't have a voice. If a victim is going through anything, someone somewhere, for whatever reason, will victim shame you. They will twist and turn and flip your story and almost make it like make you feel like, well, if I would not have been, 7, 8 years old, hanging out with all my family members, and if I would have stayed in a kid's place, or if I would have not worn those pajamas, like it makes you feel like, what could I have done to not have been abused?
And victim blaming is so insane. Like, especially how can people victim blame a child? Like,
Yes.
I don't know how that correlates because the child just trusts the authority or family members in your case. So why are you victim blaming the child?
Can a kid come to you and tell you in so much detail exactly what happened, and then you can look them in the face and tell them you just made up that entire story?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. How would they come up with that information without actually living through
Being
it?
through, yes. That was one thing that I learned was she could come up to me, my kid could come up to me and tell me so and so touched her. And if she and I won't even question it. But it's not something where I'm gonna sit here and say, well, I think you just misunderstood like where they touched you, or that's whoever, like, that's a friend of mommy's, or that's someone that we trust. Like, like it's something that I will acknowledge and actually take seriously.
For survivors, it's a huge thing to raise your voice and speak up in the first place. And then once they do, they're often shut down or no one believes them and
Oh my God.
shamed sometimes for saying like they need attention. Like I just watched like that I've seen thing on Netflix, and one
Mhm.
lady like, back in 2016 she went to different news outlets and was like, this man like harassed me and like abused me, and everyone was like, whatever, no one cared, like, oh, she's probably wants attention because he's rich, like. And then now after like the Me Too movement
Yeah.
happened, he's in jail and everything, they're like, oh, okay, now we believe you. What changed from 2016 and like 2018? Like, it just blows my mind because that's what another factor that makes it hard for survivors to come out as well. Were you ever anticipating victim blaming a little bit, or is that
Oh
something
yeah.
you drew?
Oh yeah, definitely. Especially because I'm sharing a story about something that happened to me like 17 years ago. And which makes it even more scary because people think that you should speak out right then and there, exactly when it happens, like, or like if you don't, then it never happened. They have that mentality. I got some backlash because I've done a podcast telling, about my story, about my abuse, as you know. And I got so much backlash because it was like, if that really happened, did you tell your parents? Yes. When I was 14, we went to the cops. Nothing really happened, like things like not when I was 14, I went to the cops about the 24-year-old, clear that up. But it's one of those things where people they find some way to flip it. Like I said, I get told that since it's something that happened when I was 7, 8 years old, why talk about it? That was something that happened when you were 14. That was 10 years ago. Why are you talking about it? Like, why are you trying to shame this person's name? Mind you, I don't mention names. Again, if you don't tell right then and there, and if something's not done about it right then and there, you get victim blamed and they say it never happened. There's no way it could have happened because that person would have been in jail and you would have told your parents, and they just automatically assume anything but what it could be, which is this is what happened.
Right. And I think it's common knowledge that what happens in your childhood, like it's bound to impact you as an adult. So even if they question like, oh, why are you talking about it now? It was when you were 7 years old. Like, okay, yeah, it was when I was 7 years old, and that impacts you as an adult. The time frame doesn't really make sense because also everyone is on their own timeline, they're on their own path. And as I said earlier, it's so much for a survivor to come forward in the first place. So it
Mhm.
definitely doesn't help when society, family members, friends just shut them down completely or don't believe them. You talked about being in foster care. I think that most people watching this is probably going to be like Canadians. So I was wondering, what was your experience in the American foster care system?
So mine wasn't as extensive as other people, I would say. I was truly blessed because when DCF got involved, which is a Department of Children and Families, when they got involved, basically they would do some home visits to see what was going on. This is when, some of the abuse was going on. So like, they would kind of see what's going on, talk to my parents, see my living situation. If things were not the best, like I was blessed to never really be in the system, I guess the best way to say it. I was connected to the church and I had amazing people around me who would let me come stay at their house for a decent amount of time. Like they became my foster families in a way. And then, DCF would check in with them, but it was never like maybe a few times I was placed not in the best situations, but it was never like they dragged me out the house away from my parents, like ripped me apart and then threw me into like, a situation. I always had contact with my family. I would still go see them because at some point my family was trying to get things correct. My mom was trying to get her life in a better way. My dad was working really hard for them to prove that it was a better situation because again, as time went along, they started to grow as parents also. I will say, like, I know other kids who are not as blessed, who was not as lucky. Like I've heard the stories and as crazy as it sounds, because this is gonna sound crazy, I am absolutely thankful that I was placed in these homes. Like that was the best thing to happen to me because it gave me a sense that there was more to life than what I was growing up around and with. Like there was more to me. Like they kept seeing potential past what I was going through. They didn't see just the victim. They didn't see just a kid who was in trouble or who was in these bad situations. Like, they would inspire me to be better than who I was.
Right. Oh, that's amazing. Being placed in like a different home, do you think you start to realize more how maybe unhealthy your situation at home was? Just seeing adults that you could trust.
I was a very difficult kid. I can tell you that much because I didn't trust. I was rebellious and I was, acting out how most do. Like I would have these anger moments. I remember one of my foster moms, like she's super amazing. We're still super close today. She actually lives like 2 hours away from me. But I remember I had got into it with my mom on the phone, and I was like 14 at the time. And I didn't trust her. Like I didn't trust my foster mom at the moment. I didn't trust the situation I was in. I didn't trust anyone at this point because I was so mad at the world. I was like I said, I was going through the 24-year-old situation where I was being abused and realizing what that was, and going through dealing with what I had been through as a kid. And so all of this was built up. And I remember I got into it with my mom, and then I turned around and I had my phone in my hand and I straight chuck it at the wall. My foster mom's standing there and it goes right here by her, like right by her face, right into the wall and breaks. And I expected anger. I expected to have to bolt at that moment. Like everything inside of me was like, run, like you're in trouble. And I was so used to such negative emotions that she actually hugged me. Like she held me and she hugged me and she let me cry. And that was when that's when I actually realized I could trust some people. And even to that extent, like it was still very limited trust. My family wasn't the worst. It's just when it came to what I was going through, I couldn't tell them what I was going through.
Yeah.
And so I finally felt like this was someone I could talk to. And then I did. And that's what I can say I'm very grateful for because, it did help me to realize that you can talk to adults who actually do believe you, who actually can see your pain and who won't, brush it off.
Definitely opened a door for you. in terms of
Yes.
growth, healing, and I feel like just as humans, like toxic positivity is just too much. Oh, just like be happy, like put a band-aid
Oh,
on it, what move
yes.
on. But like sometimes you need to cry. Like sometimes like you need to.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just need to wallow in that sadness and it's okay to cry. Like we don't have to put on a happy face 24/7. Like we're humans, we're not meant to feel happy all the time. I feel like as a society we need to start normalizing mental health and realize like the struggles as humans because we all have them in reality, but we just choose not to talk about it because of toxic positivity. Right.
I can
So
definitely agree on that.
So you said that speaking about your experiences with your family, they wouldn't really acknowledge it. So today, do you feel like you kind of resent them a little bit? Do you blame them for either not noticing or noticing and not doing anything about it? Do you have any resent?
I used to. I will say up until about the end of 2019 was when I finally forgave them. But leading up to that, there was like it was like no matter how much I loved them, I still saw these people that failed me. I saw these people who didn't believe me. I saw these people who won't even acknowledge half the things I'm going through. I've had multiple suicide attempts, and it was almost as if like it was such a negative, uncomfortable thing that they wouldn't talk to me about it. Like it would just be like you good? Yeah, I'm fine. Okay, swept it on the table, called it a day. Not like or even if I said no, I'm not fine, it would just be like you'll be okay. And so
Right.
I did end up getting so much resentment because I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel like they cared. And that's where a big part of it came from. I didn't feel heard. I didn't feel acknowledged. I felt like I was broken and a burden. We didn't talk about my abuse. Hell, I mean, we still don't. I've tried to bring it up. We kind of, crossed into it a little bit, but you could just tell like it's not something that some people are ready for. So we don't talk about that. We don't talk about my depression. We don't talk about the suicidal attempts. Like we didn't talk about how I have my kid by one of my abusers. And they don't even acknowledge that he exists, that anything ever happened, like nothing. I mean, nothing. It took me up until 2019 when I realized I was harboring all this anger, resentment, especially towards my parents. Um, and I wrote like this letter to them, like, listen, all of these things I was angry about, all these ways they failed me, or that I felt like they could have just helped me and protected me and been there for me. And then as I'm reading it, it clicked. These are not the same people that I dealt when I was 14 or 18. And so I take a step back and I look and I'm like, they have tried in some way, shape, or form to be better, to try to bring a little bit more to the table. I mean, it's not what I need, but you got to give props to where you
Start.
can. Yeah, and it's like I don't carry resentment. I wish that it was something that was more comfortable to talk about, but I won't push it. I will say that I can see the guilt that they carry, and I try to ease it by forgiving them, but that's their own battle to face. Like it's not mine.
So, how did you find the strength in you to forgive them? Because you said it was until 2019 till you forgave them. And I feel like that just takes so much strength because so much has happened to you. So, what would you say to someone that's either has gone through this or is going through something similar? How do you forgive?
It was the moment when I realized like that's what was holding me back because it was just hurting me. Because it wasn't just my parents, it was all my abusers, it was my exes, it was the family members, the friends of the family, the strangers. It was in those moments when I realized I'm crying, I'm hurting, I'm cutting, I'm breaking down, I'm carrying all this trauma, and they're just going on. And it was like, what? Why is it that they can just go on and I'm hurting and I'm just going through everything? And it was like these stages. But at the end, it was like you let go. But you don't want to just let go
Mhm.
because then there's no point, like, you never truly let go. There's no way possible that you just say, I let go of my abuse. I let go of everything I've been through. And then you just let go. So it was the moment where I said, you know what, I let go of what I have been holding on to basically. Like I forgive them for everything that they did. I forgive them for hurting me. I forgive myself for the things I didn't know that I do know now. I forgive, little Scooby, which is my inner child. Like I forgive her because it was never her fault. Like it's like a whole thing of forgiving yourself grace, forgiving yourself kindness.
Mhm.
And then you take that and you realize like I'm never gonna truly let it go, but at least this way it doesn't burden me anymore. And I mean, yeah, it took a lot of strength. And I mean, still to this day, I still realize like I'm still having to forgive a little bit more. But once you forgive, you realize like you feel it. And then once you forgive the big stuff, then you start to just treat yourself how you would treat anyone else.
Mhm. It's crazy how much happens when you forgive other people, how much it impacts yourself and
Yes.
your own mental health. Like, I know I can say for myself, like, when I forgive other people, um, it helps me so much. Like, I always say, just pray about it and let it go for things you can't control. Because sometimes, like, for your own sake and for your own mental health, like, you just need to pray about it, let it go, and maybe forgive yourself, forgive the other people, and just not move on because obviously like everything is valid, your experience is extremely valid, your voice is valid, but kind of accept that it was a part of your life and then grow from that and not just say like, oh, that was a chapter, close the door, don't think about it again,
Yeah.
because yeah, it's such an important part of your life and it's what makes you you today and why you're so strong. And yeah,
I think that's the big boundary crossing, which I may be wrong. And so whoever hears this and they feel, offended by it, I don't mean it in any way. But to me, that was the big crossing between victim and survivor. Like
mhm,
victim and warrior. That's what crossed me was I was no longer like the moment I forgave and the moment that I let it go, like I was like, I'm not that scared kid anymore. I'm not that dumb teenager who was put in these positions. Once I got rid of the that mindset and that this is all the pain that I have because of this is what happened to me and they're living their life and I'm just carrying it and carrying it. It was like once I let it go and I was like, you know what, this is what happened to me, but it's not gonna affect me anymore. Like I'm gonna take it and I'm gonna turn it into something better. And now I can look and say, like, I'm a survivor, damn it. Like, excuse my language, but like I'm a survivor. And at the end of the day, like that's my story. Yeah, I went through it. Yeah, this is painful. I have my moments, I have these like days, but it's not gonna break me. Like this is me. Like I survived all of that for a reason.
mhm,
And then
yeah,
to me, that was that big step. Like I said, that was the line that crossed from victim to survivor.
right. And you're standing strong today. Obviously, you're
Yeah.
an amazing parent. You're an amazing parent, and I'm so proud of you. I know we only met like last week, but I'm so proud of you. Yeah, your strength and resilience is amazing. So, and it's so inspiring to hear your journey.
Thank you.
And thank you for being so vulnerable and opening up about everything. I really appreciate it. And
Of course.
I know, yeah, at least one person is going to hear this and be so motivated and inspired by you. What made you interested in start telling your story? Because I know that you did a podcast with Lily, which was
Yes.
amazing, by the way,
Thank you.
and that's done. So, what made you inspired to start that path and start telling your story and opening up?
It was the realization that everything was a secret in my life. Like no one knew what I was going through. And it made me want to bring awareness that abuse happens in the family, to bring awareness that you could tell someone and they won't do anything about it because the people again think that once you tell and it's supposed to be a process, sometimes it doesn't happen. It's awareness about how as a 14-year-old, you should not be dating a 24-year-old, but you don't know any better. And it does not mean that you're being fast or grown or out there in the streets and, trying to be in an adult's place. Is that you were manipulated and groomed and you just didn't know. And they should have known better, but you were still learning. It's wanting to bring to light everything I went through that people don't talk about, and wanting, just one person, like you said, to hear it and to say, hey, my story is similar to hers. And it's not just me. Like, it's not just me that went through X, Y, and Z. It's not just me who still struggles with these things. Like, someone else did it, and they felt safe enough to tell their story, and their story matters, which means my story matters. This journey really just started because at some point you find your voice and you realize your story matters, and some things are not talked about enough, and you just want to give someone what you wish you would have had growing up.
Right. Jennifer, why do you think that as children, we're often we often normalize toxic behaviors? Like, for instance, as a child, have you ever been told like, oh, if a boy hits you, if a boy bullies you, that means they like you? Like, have
Yes.
you who came up with that idea? Like,
I used
please.
to I used to go around hitting boys, like, in school, because I was like, well, if boys can hit you and they like you, then I used to hit boys and girls because, like, I'm
Yeah.
gay, but I knew I liked girls at some point. But the normalcy was dating boys. So yeah, in second grade, I used to beat up every boy that I liked. I mean, I would beat them up. I slug you in the arm 3 times a day so you can get the hint. I like you. Like, I like
Yeah.
you. Be my boyfriend at, when we're third graders. I like you. And they would be like, why are you hitting me? Because that's what you do when you like someone. Like,
Mm,
I would hit girls. Like, that's what you do when you like someone, right?
yeah. Oh my God. And do you think that's like what someone has told you, or was that like a learned behavior from like what was going on at home in your own life?
It was definitely what someone had told me, but I will say that when I started getting abused when I was 14 in my relationship, like, I thought it was normal because I would get hit and then they would say, like, I love you. And I thought that's what love was like, you would have a broken rib, but you love me, because I grew up thinking if you like someone, you hit them. So if you love someone, then of course you're going to be fighting. Like, I would get beat up, and then if I would hit back, it was because, part of me was scared, defensive, but like the other part of me was like, this is normal because this is love.
That's just insane. Like that kind of cycle where it starts, and that's what you, and you're so young because you're so young, and then that's what you know, that's what you learned. So it's just like a cycle of abuse.
I mean, my abusive relationships lasted up like a while. Look, they lasted so long that like, it was like I learned you like someone, you hit them, and then 14, I learned at that moment was when I really learned if you if I hit you and I beat you up, as long as I said I love you, then I love you. And so when I became older and I got into these relationships, it was 2017 when I got into my last abusive relationship. And I got into a healthy one, but then it was so weird because it switched, right? It was like I got into a healthy relationship. She's not hitting me. Like, we're not hitting each other, but it was like it was so engraved that eventually I started to show these toxic behaviors that I learned, these abusive behaviors that I learned. Because again, when that's all you know that love is, you get into a healthy version of love, you don't know what to do. So you show your version of love.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So that's pretty much all you were exposed to, and then that was your definition of love in a way. You mentioned that you had a child with your abuser. Do you mind speaking about that a little bit? How it impacted you, your
Yeah.
journey through that?
Yeah. So he was my dad's best friend, one of the 24-year-olds. And he was kind and sweet, and we developed this trauma bond because he came right after the first 24-year-old really beat the crap out of me and hurt me. He was the understanding version. So it's like devil, the devil's advocate or whatever it's called. Like, in my version, there's one 24-year-old that was the devil, and then there was one that was not as much of a devil. And so
Right.
he's the one that's not as much of the devil. But it was like there's this trauma bond that developed. And as time went on, if I got like upset at my parents or I just needed some form of love, some form of like trust and someone that like loved me and cared about me, he was the person that I went to. And it was like that for 4 years. Like I was groomed by him to be perfect in a way. So it's like I knew exactly what to say for him and like, it was weird. And when I was 18, like I got drunk and he's the person that I trusted and I called. Because I was drunk at a party. I didn't want to tell my parents. I was scared. I didn't want to call whoever at the time. And so he was the person that I called. And I needed just someone to be there. And then I have a kid. And I didn't want a kid by my abuser because I think that's when it really started to hit me. Like, I didn't want this realization that, it's weird because I'm like, if he could look at me like that when I was 14, like, and I was like a daughter to him, like, it's so many emotions. And I try to pull, like, I gave him the out, and he's only met her by accident one time. And with her, like I came over, that was the hardest part, was the postpartum. It was as time went along, you realize he was abused, like he was one of my abusers. And then you start labeling it. I have a kid by an abuser. Oh my God, like I have a kid by an abuser. And it just made the postpartum so much worse that like for a while there, as much as I loved her, I cried and I felt so much shame because I was like, even if your dad was involved, how would I feel? Because he's an abuser. He's my abuser. And so it took a lot of therapy. It took a lot of separating the two. Like I would look at this beautiful, precious baby girl, and I realized like you are not him. You're never gonna be exposed to that. Like I got you. And now she's my best friend. It took a lot. It took taking the labels off of it because labels, once you put a label on it, it's so hard. Like if you
Yeah.
if you put a label on instead of like sperm donor or child's father or baby daddy, it was abuser, and it just hurt even more.
Yeah. That dynamic and those feelings, that whole situation is so complex because obviously, like, you love your child, but at the same time, like, all these influences are
Yeah,
impacting you. It's so complex, that whole situation for a mother to go through. And I think for parents, it's kind of natural for them to see their child as like an extension of them in a
mhm.
way. But once you took the label off and then you realize, like, oh, this is like a separate human. And I think, like, would you say that's where like most of the growth happened? And obviously, you don't put that label anymore, but it
Yeah,
was,
growth definitely happened the moment that I realized she's my kid, regardless of who. Like she's my kid, and it's like the power in it because then you realize she's my kid. Like no
exactly.
matter who it is, no matter what happened, and yeah, you start being more determined, especially with the situation, because then it's like I'll be damned if she ever gets put in that situation. Like, it's empowering, like words, labels, how you think about them. Like people don't realize like how much of an impact they have on you.
Mhm. And it's interesting because it kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier. Family blood doesn't mean as much as it makes it out to be. Like, for example, like maybe some friends of yours would be closer than like her
Yes.
father or like any relatives. You've mentioned like your abusers and like the people who've groomed you, they've called you mature a lot. But do you think that was a way of them like maybe forcing you to be what they want, or force, maybe it was like, I don't know, I'm just like assuming, but maybe it was like a justification for them. Like, oh,
Yes.
okay, maybe he's underage, but she's mature, so it's okay. You think?
Basically, because it was like the reason why I say it was kind of being groomed, it was more like a hey, like you're so mature, but let me teach you how to like properly talk to guys. Let me teach you how to properly take care of a house. It was literally that they were building me to
Right.
be what they wanted. And like, but it was always, you're so mature. And so, of course, when you, like you said, like it was almost like a justification, like, yeah, I know, like she's only 14, but like she's carrying herself a certain way. It's okay for them in their head. And I hated that word, like that word mature. Even to this day, I'm still learning to kind of accept it. That was a negative word for me. It had like such the opposite effect of what I wanted.
Right, which makes total sense. Like your definition of mature was like completely different because I maybe they have pushed mature onto you and
Hmm.
they didn't let you just be a kid. They kind of forced you into being the person that they wanted. So that's just obviously a lot for a 14-year-old to handle. So do you think that in a way you were robbed from a childhood? Would you say that?
I Yes and no. Like it's weird because it depends on what your definition of a childhood is, right? Because I still grew up pretty good for what I went through. I mean, I still had like the imagination, I still had like all these childhood experiences. I did grow up faster than I wanted to, as far as like in some areas, but in most, like if you would have asked anyone, they wouldn't have even known half the things I was going through because I was still so childlike. Like I was still innocent to the world. I wouldn't say I was robbed of a childhood, but I will say my teenage years, that's what I was robbed of. Because
Right.
then, I felt more protective of, I have a little sister. I felt more protective of her. So then I became mother like. Like I said, I didn't get that 14, that 12 to 14-year-old middle school years that most people got, where it's like, you're just trying to find yourself. I got put into a grown up world when I was like 12. More like that's what I say I was robbed of. Not really so much the childhood, but definitely as you get older and you start to find yourself in your body, that, yeah.
Oh my God, that's insane. Like you've literally jumped from like 12 to like 30 years old.
25. Yeah.
Like,
Like that's why now I don't care for drinking and stuff because I partied my whole from like I was like 13 up until 18 basically. I partied my whole 20s away. That's how bad it was.
yeah. And then you had a child at 18 or
Yeah,
18.
18, yes.
So you've definitely been taking care of other people since then.
Yeah. In some way,
And
shape, or form. Yeah.
how are you doing today? Are you in a good place? How are you?
I would say I am. I just moved, so like I'm getting homesick. But other than that, like I will say mental wise, it's still a work in progress. Like I said, everyone has the rough days. Every survivor will have his rough days. So mentally, I'm good. Emotionally, I have my ups and downs. Me and my daughter, we are building a much stronger bond. I mean, we're like attached at the hip 24/7. And when I say 24/7, she's doing homeschool and she goes to work with me. So like we
Oh,
are together. But I mean, that's amazing bonding time for me right there. Getting my story out has been the most healing process of all the processes. It's
right.
invigorating.
And just taking that first step is really difficult. So props to you, Jennifer, for
Yeah.
even opening up and doing those podcasts. You choose to use your voice, and I applaud you for that. Just quickly going back to the victim blaming because I had a question I forgot, but now I remember. Um, you don't use people's names. You don't acknowledge people's names, and I think that's really interesting because people who victim blame, like, oh, they're just doing it for attention, what
Mhm.
are they gonna say? Because you're not even using their name, like people's names. So
The reason why I try not to mention names is because one, I'm I've made some peace. Like I've spoken to some of my abusers and I made some peace with them. And again, a lot of people aren't who they used to be. So I try not to like tarnish anyone's name, especially when they've come so far. That's just my choice. Some of them would be okay. Like I've even had, one of my uncles even tell me like if I wanted to put his name in one of my podcasts, like he'll, it's something that has to come to light at some point. And I told him, you know, me not putting your name on a podcast is not for you so much. Um,
hmm,
because we still bring it up in the family. So the family knows. So I mean, that's all out there. As far as like public wise, that was I try to remember that they're not the same people, but I did it for another reason, which is crazy to say, but I did it for me in a way to not put their names out because I wanted to see something. A lot of my family was not there for me. A lot of people did not acknowledge it. I wanted to see how much of my family knew. And so when I kept promoting that I was doing a podcast, I kept having so many people reach out, family members, that was like, hey, glad that you're speaking out and doing your thing. Keep the family name out of it. Keep so and so's name out of it, which meant you knew. I never said a single name, but you knew who I was talking about. And so I did it for me to basically to see what I needed to see with my family. As far as victim blaming really goes, like I still get it a lot. I get it about, the 24-year-olds that I was 14, I should have known better. I get it about my ex a couple years ago about how I was in a domestic violence abusive relationship for 2 years. Well, you were there for 2 years. Why didn't you just walk away? I was scared. That's what cops are for. Well, I didn't
Right.
know, I thought that I could be there for her and I thought I could love her through it all. Well, that's your choice for staying. Like, they flip the switch no matter what happens. The whole point of me doing the podcast, again, I'm expecting, like, most of it rests off my shoulder. I'm going to be honest. Like, I've dealt with it so long in my life. Strangers don't really affect me. My family, they stopped affecting me a long time ago. And so the whole point of me doing it was, to give voice to those who have been, again, through everything that they've been through. And I knew there would be negativity, but for every negative comment that I've gotten so far, I've gotten 3 positive, encouraging, thank you so much messages. Like it's
Yeah.
expected. And as far as victim blaming goes, like I'm gonna bring attention to different sides of every story because every situation will never be the same. And all I'm trying to do is just show you guys, whoever decides to victim blame, there's so many different versions of a story. You're gonna have to open your eyes up and stop.
A common response I feel like is, why didn't you just walk away? Why didn't you just leave? Have you gotten that a lot?
So much,
Like,
a lot when I was going through it, you know, every victim has a different mindset. Every situation is different. You never know till you're in it. And um, one of the biggest ones was, why didn't you just walk away? You could be scared. You could have hope. You
Exactly.
could be blinded by love. I mean, there's so many different reasons, but none of the reasons justify getting abused. None of those reasons justify what happened to you. And so all we can do is we do our best in that situation. And like I said, I had to forgive myself for not walking away when I should have, but me staying didn't mean that I kept asking to get beat up. Because
Exactly.
it's not like I was sitting there with my mouth shut. Like it was like I was trying to fix it. I kept voicing how to fix it. I kept talking. I kept putting in the work and you do your best.
Mhm. It's so much more complex than, oh, why don't you just leave? Because there's emotional attached to it, there's financial, there's so many different avenues attached to it that just makes it more complex for anyone who's watching. How do you break out of the cycle, and how did you start on your path for growth and healing?
Sadly, my way of breaking out of the cycle was you had to have something super traumatic happen to you. So like I didn't get out of my abusive relationship until I was laying in a hospital bed and I had got stabbed. And so like it's it's rough. We all reach our breaking point some way, shape, or form, but it's when you make that decision, no matter how hard it is, like you stick to it. And then healing is so messy. It is the messiest thing because you can run away from every situation that you've ever been in. Like you can literally run, you can run, but you cannot run away from yourself. And so, me starting this journey of growth and healing, it all starts with you. And it's messy. Like, it is so messy. And I say messy because there's no other way to put it. Like, there will be days, I can have months at a time where I'm on this roll and I'm like, I'm healing and I got over this and I don't think about this. And, or like, even if I do think about it, then it's like a positive thing here. And it's like, I'm combating it. And then There'll be days where I think I'm over something and that trauma, that hurt just hits me. And it's almost so bad. I feel like I have to start all over, but it's accepting, it's crying through it, it's feeling the emotions, and it's working through every step with it. Because you're always going to heal from something, you're always going to heal. Once you strengthen your mind and you have control over your emotions and you work on you, you can basically take on the world as long as you have you in control.
That's so important to talk about, that you can run away from everything, but you can't run away from yourself. Like, that's so important. And I think that's why we need to normalize things like mental health and self care, healing, therapy, like, and just to take care of yourself, your inner healing. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for talking to me today and for joining the Maribel Beauty community. I appreciate it so much. Hearing your story is truly a blessing. It's an honor, and you're so resilient. You're a survivor, and I can't say it enough. You're amazing. It's been such a pleasure just getting to know you, honestly. I hope we stay connected in the future because you're just awesome.
Thank you. Like you, your platform has definitely given me a voice. Thank you have given me the opportunity to tell my story. And I am completely and honestly blessed for that one. And I'm excited to see the journey that you take because what you're doing is it's amazing. So thank you also. Like you are another stepping stone in my journey and you've contributed so much to me. So I really appreciate it.